Welcome to WanaxTV Live. In this episode, we're talking about the Bronze Age Kingdom of Arzawa. Before we begin, I'd like to thank to everybody joining us live in the chat right now, to all of the YouTube subscribers, all of the YouTube exclusive members, and all of the Patreon members. Special thanks to Lino Benetti for a super chat in this live right now. This, which I have on the screen, is actually supposed to be for the previous episode. So thank you to Lino Benetti twice. And today's topic of the day is the late Bronze Age Kingdom of as 8 segments, as you can see on the screen. But before we go through with it, we have a very active chat. I'd like to give a few shout outs. Luis Aldames, thank you for being here. The first comment, always great to see you. Obviously, Lino Benetti is here as well, active on every episode. Thank you very much. We have Grand Regent with a few questions. Basil is in the chat as well. Hello to you. There's going to be discussion when it comes to Lydians as well, as I can see from the chat. Also, currently in the works, as I have mentioned in many of the previous episodes, is the Etruscan Civilization documentary, which is coming along nicely. We're almost done, about 90% completed, I would say. The documentary will be the best produced, best quality production that we ever did on the channel. I have a special narrator for the episode. It will be about 2 hours long. Narrator being Thomas Wicello. Shout out to him. And we'll go through the entire history of the Etruscans, from the very early origins, their identity, their linguistic identity, and so on, to their their mythology, history, relations, historical relations with the Romans during the kingdom period, relations with the Greeks, with the Phoenicians, Carthaginians, other Italic people, Celts, and so on, and ultimately their fall at the hands of the Roman Republic. Shout out to History with Sai, who is also in the chat. Hello to History with Sai, and he's a great friend of the channel. Hopefully, we get to do some of these episodes together in the near future. But shout out to History with Sai. History with Sai has been with the channel since day one, since day zero, actually, even before I did the very first video on the channel. So great to have Sai here as well. And there will be some other news, some other updates in the coming weeks, perhaps months, but likely weeks. Stay tuned for those. And with that being said, I think that we are ready to start with the topic of the day. And the topic of the day is the Kingdom of Arzawa. Many of you who follow the episodes on this channel are likely familiar with Arzawa. We're talking about the Western Anatolian Kingdom, with the capital city in Ephesus, or Apasa, the coastal and Western Anatolian city, territory spanning further inland, roughly corresponding to the areas of historical kingdoms of Lydia, perhaps parts of Caria, and so on. Either way, as you can see, segments are on the screen. We're going to talk about their identity first, mention their possible origins as well. We'll go through their early mentions in the time of the early and middle Hittite kingdom, I believe. Then, of course, the Assuwa League. Many of you are already familiar with the Assuwa League or Assuwa Confederation, which had battles against the Hittite Empire during the reign of Tudhaliya. And then we're going to go through their three historically recorded kings. The first one being Kupanta-Kurunta in the late 15th and early 14th century BC. Then we're going to go through the greatest of the Arzawan kings, most likely, which is Tarhuntaradu, during whose reign Arzawa was considered to be a great kingdom by the Egyptians, which is the pinnacle of their power and influence. And the last and the final independent Arzawan king, which is Uhhaziti. During his reign, we have the fall of Arzawa to the hands of the Hittites. But we will not stop there. We'll continue, we'll move on, and the conquered Arzawa had rebellions against the Hittites, and that's where we're going to talk about Piyamaradu, also a very well-known individual or historical person on this channel. And we'll finish the episode with the Bronze Age collapse, which is often the case when we talk about these Bronze Age and late Bronze Age kingdoms and political entities. We already have some questions, some discussions in the comment section. We'll address that after each and every segment. We're going to take a little pause and see what's happening in the chat and address some of your questions. Without further ado, the kingdom of Arzawa. Who were the Arzawans? And please, somebody confirm is if there is anything wrong with the sound, with the voice. Let me know. I've done the testing. Hopefully everything's fine. So let's go with the first segment, which is identity and origins of Arzawa. As we can see on the screen, the Hittites they wrote Arzawa in their text. As you can see, it's Arzawa. The linear B Mycenaean version would be Assyria, which is ethnonym or ethnic adjective meaning Assuwan or Arzawan. So there's no clear distinction between Assuwa and Arzawa when it comes to the Mycenaean Greeks, at least not judging by the linear B records. Below that, you can see the Egyptian version. And the Arzawans were either, they were definitely Anatolian group of people, whether they were Luvic, Luvian, or belonging to a broader Anatolian category, as we have the case with the Lydians. We do not have exact classification on that. So let's put it this way: Anatolian peoples, and this is based on languages. This is a linguistic classification, obviously. So when it comes to the Anatolians, we have a few subgroups when it among the let's Anatolian languages, what the linguists consider to be Anatolian languages. We have this classification to Hittite, to Palaic, to Lydian, and to Luvian or Luvic. Luvic being a broader category which in itself consists of Luvian, perhaps Lucian, and some other languages. So when it comes to these linguistic categories, I would say Hittite and Palaic would have been kind of the eastern branch, and the western branch would be Lydian slash Luvo, Lydian on one side and Luvian on another. So where does the Arzawan belong here? The language which is spoken by the Arzawans. obviously it was not called Arzawan language. It was likely related to Luvian or Luvic or Proto-Lydian. So we are not sure exactly, but we are pretty sure that it's one of these categories. It's just that unfortunately we do not have many written records from the Arzawans, so we cannot make the exact classification. We do have a few of the inscriptions using the Hittite cuneiform, which cannot tell us much. And we also have only a handful of Anatolian hieroglyphic inscriptions, based on which we are unable to determine whether this language is a Proto-Lydian, or is it a Luvian, or is it other Luvic language. So we are not sure. It's one of these. That's what we are pretty sure about. But and we are sure that it's much closer to Luvian or Proto-Lydian or Lydian than it is to the Hittite or Palaic on another side of the Anatolian spectrum. So with that being said, we have this association with Assuwa or Asia. That's where word Asia originates from, especially when it comes to the Mycenaean Greek sources. As we have already said, there's no clear distinction between Assuwa and Arzawa. They use Assyria, which is essentially Asia, for both entities. And the differentiation between these entities historically is also blurry. So we'll get to that when we talk about the Assuwa Confederation later on. As we have mentioned at the beginning, the capital city of the kingdom of Arzawa was the city of Ephesus, in the Hittite known as Apasa, and their territories spanned from the coastal region, which is Ephesus being the coastal city, and going further inland constituting or including the cities such as Yalanda and territories further inland. At various times, it included Hapala, the region of Hapala, at some point even Pitasa on the Hittite border. So the borders of this kingdom changed very much throughout the history, for better or worse, but the core of their territory was roughly corresponding to an area between historical, let's say, Lydia and going towards Caria, but not including the city of Miletus, which was a chief Mycenaean stronghold in the late Bronze Age. And also we have a rather broad or unclear references to Arzawa by the Hittites in various periods of time. Sometimes they refer to the kingdom of Arzawa itself, or let's say Arzawa proper, centered around the city of Ephesus. But sometimes they include other regions and kingdoms and states in what they broadly call the Arzawa lands. So sometimes when the Hittite sources refer to Arzawa lands, they include Arzawa proper, but they also variously include kingdoms of Mira, Seha, and even Vilusa at some points. But obviously, here we're talking about the kingdom of Arzawa, not the Arzawa lands, whatever that might mean broadly. That so the Arzawa lands likely referred to the people inhabiting these kingdoms, talking about Arzawa, Mira, Seha, Hapala, and Vilusa. So essentially Luvians or Luvic speaking peoples, which is possibly what the Hittites mean when they broadly use the term Arzawa lands. So in this episode, we're talking about the Arzawa kingdom. Basil says Arzawa equals Luvians. Possibly, likely, but we are not 100% sure because Luvians is a very broad category and it spans all the way from the lower Hittite lands in southern coastal Anatolia all the way to the western coastal Anatolia. And whether or not some of these peoples are Luvians or Luvic peoples who would be related to Luvians but not Luvians themselves, like cousins to Luvians. That's a question, or even a little bit of a broader category, Anatolians who are related to Luvic peoples and thus Luvians themselves, but they themselves speak a language a little bit different to Luvian language. Such example would be the Lydians, who are usually associated with Arzawa the most, especially Proto-Lydians would be theoretically corresponding to the late Bronze Age kingdom of Arzawa. Luis Aldame says, I go by Assuwa equals Arzawa equals Western Asia Minor. Exact meaning may vary because of context. That's correct. Shout out to Interdictor in the chat. He's also joining us. Very nice. Yanis is also here. He says, good morning, my friend. Shout out to you, Yanis. Welcome to the episode. We're just at the beginning, so you are not late. All right, so when it comes to this segment, I think it's safe for us to move on, and we're entering these early historical mentions of Arzawa. We're obviously talking about early Hittite kingdom period, and the very first mention goes back to the reign of Hattusili the first in the 17th century BC, the mid-century. Hattusili recorded Hittite campaign in western Anatolia, more like a raid or a plundering campaign where the Hittite army invaded the Arzawan territory. They burned some settlements over there. They plundered the land, and Hattusili claims to had reached the sea, that he made the sea his border or something along those lines. He reportedly captured thousands of cattle, sheep, silver, gold, and tens of thousands of prisoners. He apparently won several battles and defeated everybody that came his way, if I am correct. Either way, he conducted this campaign. He did not conquer the Arzawa territory. He did not subjugate Arzawa. As we can see, the king of Arzawa, who is not named, he managed to flee, but he was not captured. And afterwards, the Hittites, they withdrew back to the Hittite territory without conquering Arzawa. So it was more like um, like a Hittite raid on Babylon. We do know that the Hittites during the Old Kingdom captured the city of Babylon, actually sacked Babylon, but then withdrew. They did not stay in Mesopotamia. They did not have logistics to accomplish that. They just managed to breach the city, sack the city, and then return back home. That's roughly what happened with Arzawa as well. They managed to break in, defeat the Arzawan army, plunder the land, capture thousands of prisoners, get some gold, silver, sheep, cattle, and return back. The next mention comes a century later, and now we're talking about the reign of King Amuna during the Middle Kingdom period, and this is a period where the Hittites were slowly losing grip of their power, especially during because of the dynastic struggles, the interdynastic struggles within the ruling house of the Hittites, and this allowed many of their adversaries to seize the opportunity and defeat them on several fronts. So we have decline of the Hittite Empire during this period. Likewise, the lands of Arzawa rebelled. So as you can see, we have reference to the lands of Arzawa, plural, not only the kingdom of Arzawa, so likely it was their allies as well. They became hostile to the Hittites, and we have King Amuna leading the military campaign in person, and this time the Hittites are defeated. We have a decisive Arzavan victory, and as a result of this, we have withdrawal of the Hittites beyond the Sangarius River. So the Hittites were driven out, and everything from the Aegean Sea to the Sangarius River, which would later become the core area of the Phrygian settlement in the later centuries, is now controlled by Arzawans. So whether or not this is controlled specifically by the kingdom of Arzawa itself, the Arzawa proper, centered around the city of Ephesus, or other entities which the Hittites viewed as Arzawan, namely Mira, Seha, perhaps Wilusa, and or some other states, we are not sure, but the Hittites are pushed back beyond the Sangarius River. We have Mike Joseph in the chat. Shout out to Mike. And we have Ilario also. Shout out to Ilario as well. So these two are the earliest mentions of struggles between the Hittites and the Arzawans. These two would be arch enemies in the following centuries as well. Heidi says, watching with my son Gabriel from Quebec. Well, thank you for being here. Shout out to you and Quebec. I'm not sure what the time, perhaps we are on the same or similar time zone, but anyway, thank you very much. All right, so we have gone through these early mentions of Arzawa by the Hittites, the reign of Hattusili I, Old Kingdom period, mid 17th century BC. He conducted a successful raid. He plundered the area. He got tens of thousands of prisoners. The Hittites also acquired thousands of cattle and sheep. They also acquired some gold and silver. And from that point on, they pretty much stood as a hegemonic power in the area, not conquering Arzawa directly or any other lands directly, but they held a sway, so to say, which was ended about a century later during the reign of King Amuna, where these lands became hostile to Hatti. According to the Hittites, they rebelled, and Amuna marched himself, personally leading the army in order to squash this so-called rebellion. Did not happen. Arzawans were decisively victorious, and the Hittites were pushed beyond the Sangarius River. So fast forward another century, which is the next mention of Arzawa. Not specifically Arzawa, actually. Here we are arriving to the Assuwa mention, the Assuwa League, aka Assuwa Confederation, as it was stated by the Hittites. This confederation was constituting of 22 cities and states of Western Anatolia. The relation to Arzawa is clear, although Arzawa itself was not specifically mentioned here, so we are not exactly sure if the kingdom of Arzawa was kind of the hegemon behind the whole Assuwa Confederation. We are also not sure if what Arzawan exact role here was because it is not mentioned, but we do have Vilusa, which is often mentioned as one of the Arzawa lands, Velusa being the historical late Bronze Age Troy, the state of Troy, and they are constituents of this confederation. So whatever the relation between Assuwa and Arzawa was, which once again we are not exactly sure what it was, but we are sure that there was some relation there. Obviously, when it comes to the Linear B Mycenaean records, there's no clear distinction between the two. They refer as Asavia or Asia, Asivia, excuse me, Asivia or Asia or Asia to the Western Anatolian polity, regardless whether we're talking about Assuwa or Arzawa. There was no clear differentiation between the two in the Mycenaean records. Obviously, there is some differentiation in the Hittite records, and the coalition was formed to oppose the growing Hittite threat. This is the reign of Tudhaliya II, during whose time we see increase and revival of the Hittite power in Western Anatolia. This coalition of 22 cities and states, you can see it on the screen. Some of the names are incomplete and some of the names are unknown to us. But what we see is Luga, possibly Luca, which is the Luca lands. We have Kispua, Unalia. We have one name which is unfortunately lost due to poorly preserved inscriptions or damaged or destroyed parts of the inscriptions. We have a Dura, Haluva, Havalusia. We have a Karkisa, which corresponds to historical Caria. Caria being a region between Arzawa or between Arzawa and Luca, or in classical terms, between Lydia and Lycia. So we have a Karkisa, we have a Dunda, Abdura, Adudra, excuse me, Paritsa. Some of the names obviously we cannot see here. We have Varsia, Kurupia, Alata, Mount Pahurina, and Vilusa and Tariusa. The Vilusia and Tariusa are usually considered to mean Troy or Vilusa or Ilion, and Troad, Troad being the broader region around Troy, possibly consisting of the city of Dardanos and some other neighboring settlements. We are not exactly sure, but that appears to be the case. What happened during this war is Hittite victory. So Tudhaliya II was able to defeat this coalition. He conquered the population, acquired, he captured some population, some cattle, oxen, sheep. He captured whatever was considered to be land possessions, as we can see here, 10,000 foot soldiers, 600 teams of horses for chariots. So it was a very big loot for the Hittites, together with the so-called lords of the bridle. All of these were brought triumphantly to Hattusa, and from this point on, we have a Hittite influence in the area. We have Hittite attempts to control this whole region, this whole area of Western Anatolia through various means. And we also have emergence of the Mycenaean Greeks on the other side, to the further west. Mycenaean Greece being the chief polity or the polity called Ahiava or Achaia by the Hittites, being the chief polity of the Mycenaean Greece, likely holding most, if not all, of the Mycenaean Greece under some type of control, headed by a king, presumably located in the city of Mycenae, considered to be equal in power and influence by the Hittites, especially after the Mycenaean conquest of Minoan Crete, which we are talking about the similar period here, reign of Tudhalia being from 1465 to 1440 BC, and this is roughly the time when the Mycenaeans conquered Crete and expanded into mainland Anatolia, with their main stronghold being the city of Miletus, in the Hittite sources known as Milawata or Milawanda. As we can see, the outcome of this dissolution of the Assuwa League was emergence of many states and city-states and petty kingdoms. Some of them were under the Hittite sway, some of them were under the Mycenaean sway and influence. And Arzawa itself emerged as the strongest Mycenaean ally in the region and the chief enemy of the Hittites. So following this, we have, as we already know, we have hostile Arzawa, judging by the Hittite perspective, and we have expansion of the Mycenaean Greeks into coastal Anatolia, their chief settlement being Miletus, former trading outpost established by the Minoans in about 2000 BC. So from 1450, it was a Minoan stronghold from where the Mycenaean stronghold, from where the Mycenaeans or the Ahiawans, as they were called by the Hittites, furthered their own interests in the region. And subsequently, we arrive to the first historically recorded king of Arzawa, and this is Kupanta-Kurunta, the king of Arzawa from approximately 1400, perhaps late 15th century BC, but definitely ruling into the early 14th century. He was an ally to the Mycenaeans, he was supported by them, and he was not very friendly towards the Hittites and towards the Hittite allies in the region. One of those Hittite allies was a king or a local ruler named Maduwata. Maduwata, we do not know exactly which city he ruled over originally. It was likely a city even either in the Luca lands or somewhere on the border between Luca lands and the Hittite held area and Arzawa itself. We are not sure, but we do know that another individual appeared at this time, and this is Atarsia of Ahia. Ahia meaning Ahiawa, the earlier term that the Hittites used for Ahiawa in the old Hittite language, meaning Mycenaean Greece. So Atarsia, who is, this name is obviously a Hittite rendering of otherwise a Greek name, which we are not 100% sure which name it was. Chief candidate is Atreus, could be something similar. We are not 100% sure. We'll just call him Atarsia or Atarsias for the purpose of this episode. Either way, he's called a man of Achaia, considered a very powerful individual. Whether he was a ruler, unlikely to have been a ruler of Achaia, but more likely a general or a regional lord, um, or possibly coming from the Mycenaean royal family or otherwise nobility. Either way, a very powerful individual in the Mycenaean hierarchy. He establishes his base of operations in Miletus, and from there he invades the territory held by Maduwata, somewhere either in Lucca or at the border of Lucca lands. So he invades over there. He's much stronger than Maduwata. Maduwata does not even resist. He simply flees. He runs and he is accepted by the Hittites. He goes to the Hittite territory. And over there, the Hittites, they want to install him as a vassal ruler in some of the pro-Hittite petty kingdoms in the area on the border between the Hittite Empire and the Arzawa lands. And they find a territory called Mount Zipasla, which we are not sure of its exact location, but presumably it was located very close to Lucca lands, perhaps somewhere at the border between Lucca lands, perhaps Tarhuntassa and historical Pisidia. We are not sure, but somewhere in the rough area of those borders. All right, when it comes to the chat, we have some discussions here. I will address some of that after this segment. Kupanta-Kurunta, he was mentioned by Luis Aldames at the beginning of the video, I believe. So one of the three, well, they might have been more historically recorded kings of Arzawa. We are not sure, but one of the three best recorded kings of Arzawa for sure. The first out of the three, the other two being Tarhuntaradu and Uhhaziti. So Maduwata, he is installed as a Hittite puppet leader or a client ruler of the Mount Zipasla territory, and from there he takes an oath of allegiance to the Hittite king. He is not to attack anybody on his own. He's not to conduct any operations on his own. He must listen to the Hittites and do what they say, and that's it. That's basically the rules. However, he does not do that. He is apparently a power-hungry individual, and he decides that it is very smart for him to attack Arzawa nonetheless. So Maduwata, he conducts invasion of Arzawa under Kupanta-Kurunta, and very soon Maduwata is defeated by King Kupanta-Kurunta. Arzavan army not only defeats Maduwata, they chase him into Zipasla land, and from there he is saved by the Hittites. I believe that he is forced to flee all the way to the Hittite territory. Kupanta-Kurunta invaded Zipasla itself, but eventually he turns back and withdraws when the Hittite army shows up to defend Maduwata. So Maduwata is once again reinstalled in Zipasla. However, this does not last for long because maybe Arzawan army has withdrawn, but the Mycenaean army headed by Atarsia shows up and they march to Zipasla. And once again, Maduwata does not sally out to fight. He straight up flees back to the Hittite territory, and Zipasla is now in a process of being taken by the Mycenaeans. It is at this time that the Hittites dispatch a royal expedition army under General Kisnapili, who goes to Zipasla, and we have the first historically recorded battle between the Hittites and the Mycenaean Greeks, the Battle of Zipasla, which ends up inconclusive. The Hittites are able to repel the Mycenaean attempt of taking this territory, but according to the Hittite records, we can see that one nobleman of the Hittites fell in battle, one important individual, and same for the Mycenaeans. One nobleman of the Achaeans also fell, which prompted Atarsia to slowly withdraw and cancel his attempted conquest of Zipasla. He goes back to Miletus, and the Hittites are able to reinstall Maduwata in the Zipasla land for another time, once again. It is at this time that Maduwata probably realizes that he does not want to have those troubles with the Mycenaeans, with the Arzawans. Obviously, the Hittites are not nearby. They're not stationed nearby. I believe they might have leave a small garrison over there, but for Maduwata to fight against an enemy which is so much more powerful than him, he needs Hittite assistance. So he low-key switches sides here and betrays the Hittites, which is apparent in the next campaign where some of the cities in the Luca lands, namely Hindua and Tlava, as recorded by the Hittite sources, they become hostile to the Hittites and they openly align themselves with the Mycenaeans. And this prompts Maduwata to call General Kisnapili and suggests him that they should attack Luca lands together and subjugate them in the name of the Hittite Empire. General Kisnapili, together with his royal expeditionary force, he agrees, and the plan was that Maduwata attacks one city and Kisnapili attacks another city, but as Kisnapili's force enters the Luca lands, Maduwata he switches sides. He meets or he tells the Lucians where the Hittite army is. He tells them how to ambush them, and that's exactly what happens. Kisnapili and all the whole Hittite army they get ambushed somewhere in Luca, and we have complete destruction of the Hittite army. Together with general himself, Kisnapili, he is killed in battle, and the Hittite expeditionary force is no more. This is a big hit to the Hittite Empire because this force under Kisnapili is basically what is holding their influence in Western Anatolia. They do not have other sizable army to send to fight. They only have strongly worded letters, such as indictment of Maduwata. This is a document which lists all of the sins and transgressions of Maduwata, his betrayal. And Maduwata himself, he does not acknowledge this betrayal. He still nominally under the Hittite vassalage, and he still writes back to the Hittites that he is with them. He deflects blame from himself, and he is likely aware that the Hittites are not able to do much at this point in time. So he does a lot of actions on his own. He marries the daughter of Kupanta-Kurunta, so he strengthens relations with Arzawa, and when the Hittite king asked him why did he do that, what is the justification, Maduwata says he did that so he can lure Kupanta-Kurunta in and then capture him. Well, whether or not the Hittites bought that excuse, we are not sure, but they were clearly unhappy with Maduwata. He not only did that, he also put some rebellions, anti-Hittite rebellions, but he did not transfer those territories to the Hittites. He took those lands for himself. So he was building himself as a powerful regional warlord in the area, while while still nominally, officially accepting or acknowledging the Hittite supremacy. But he did very little in the Hittite interest in in the following period. We also see an inscription, actually a line in the indictment of Maduwata where they say that Maduwata took the whole land of Arzawa for himself. So we are not sure what is being referred here. Did he literally go and did he become a ruler of Arzawa instead of Kupanta-Kurunta? there's no evidence for that. We are not sure. We do know that he exercised tribute from some of the cities in the Luca lands, and he exercised tribute and levied men from some of the Hittite vassal states which were in the neighborhood. And perhaps the biggest transgression of all was in the early 14th century, where he joined no less than Atarsia himself, who was conducting naval campaigns and raids on the island of Cyprus. And somehow, for some reason, Maduwata joined Atarsia, arch enemy of the Hittites, in raids of Cyprus, the kingdom of Alasia, from Cyprus being at least claimed by the Hittites to be their tributary state or a vassal state or so on. But either way, apparently under Hittite protection, Maduwata did not care about that. He just joined the Mycenaean Greeks and raided the island together with them. We have Milan Lukic, greetings from Novi Sad. Shout out to Novi Sad. And so afterwards, we have a scarcely or vaguely mentioned individual called Uhhazalma, who we are not sure if he was a next Arzawan ruler or not, but he is only known from a single inscription where he agrees to a treaty with Hittite king Arnuwanda I. This is the same king that conducted the indictment of Maduwata, so contemporary of Arnuwanda. So Uhhazalma, possible Arzawan ruler or possible ruler of another state in Western Anatolia. All right, we have Milan says Pelops, father of Atreus, came from Phrygia as a refuge, according to the myths. Phrygia doesn't exist in that time because they are somewhere in Balkans as Brigoi, Thracian tribe. Maybe Pelops is from Miletus. So there are a few theories when it comes to Pelops himself. According to some myths, he is from Phrygia originally, or perhaps Lydia, if I am correct. Other versions state that he is from I believe, northern Peloponnese originally. So we are not sure. There's a lot of it's tough. It's tough to correlate stories of Greek mythology with what historically transpired. So Brigoi were are not exactly a Thracian tribe. Brigoi were related to the Phrygians. We also did an episode of the Brigoi, and that is the last regular episode that we did on the channel before we switched to these live episodes as we work on the Etruscan civilization. So the Brigoi were essentially European Phrygians, original Phrygians before the Phrygians migrated to Anatolia. Maybe Pelops is from Miletus. Well, once again, he's a mythological figure, so perhaps there was some individual that Greek myths are based on who may or may not have been named Pelops. We are not sure. It's very difficult to correlate those. Luis Aldame says there's also a first-person stele of Kupanta-Kurunta being chessed at all his conquests, if I recall correctly. If Milawata is Miletus and Tawagalava Eteocles, how we could pronounce Maduwata on Greek? Maybe he's hiding somewhere in the midst. The pronunciation that I saw is Madiates. Um, but this is a reconstructed pronunciation. There's no, it is unknown whether or not Maduwata was Greek. He was likely Luvian, so he was likely not a Greek individual, being from some city originally, which is either in Lucca or bordering Lucca. So he was very unlikely to have been a Greek individual. Lino Benetti, he says he's having some chat with Yanis. Okay. All right. So what ultimately happened with Kupanta-Kurunta, we are not sure whether he was just succeeded by his son or other successor, possibly Uhhazama. We are not sure whether he was succeeded by Maduwata at some point. We are not sure either. We do know that he married Maduwata's daughter, or actually that Maduwata married Kupanta-Kurunta's daughter. So we are not sure what actually transpired there. Whoever was whoever was the following king of Arzawa, we likely do not know, or we are not sure of his name, but the subsequent king after that is very well known, and that is Tarhuntaradu. Tarhuntaradu, perhaps successor, perhaps a successor of a successor, um, from Kupanta-Kurunta. He ascends to the throne at some and rules in early to mid 14th century BC. So only decades later, we have Tarhuntaradu, and we have expansion of Arzawa at the expense of the Hittites and their allies. Obviously, at this point, we're talking about another Hittite decline, and this is a period known as the Hittite Wars of Survival. So the Hittites were attacked by Kaskans from the north. They're also attacked by, they also have battles in to their east. And to their west, we have expanding Arzawa, where the Hittites were not able to revive their power ever since the destruction of their army under General Kisnapili in Lucca, for which Maduwata is to blame, according to the Hittites. So we have expansion of Arzawa due to weakening of the Hittites. We have expansion into Pitasa, that's a region further inland from Arzawa towards central Anatolia. We have expansion into the Hittite lowlands, namely Tarhuntasa, which correlates with historical Pamphylia. So we have a expansion over there. We have a capture of Tuwanua, an important city in the Hittite lowlands, and establishment of a new frontier which runs from Tuwanua to the city of Uda. So you cannot see it on the screen right here. Perhaps I could bring some other map on the screen so you can see which territory we're talking about. Let's see. All right, so apparently we do not have a Hittite map over there. We'll just go by the map that goes in the background. So you can see it right here. The region to the north of Cyprus is called Tarhuntasa. So this area was presumably held, much of this area was held by Arzawa under Tarhuntaradu, which is the first time ever and the only time that Arzawa was able to expand that far. So this is the pinnacle, the absolute peak of powers when it comes to Arzawa, the king Tarhuntaradu. And during this time, Luis Aldame says maps for the win. I agree. I agree. So during this time, we have the first and the only mention of any source coming from the historical great powers of the late Bronze Age, labeling or associating Arzawa with the term great power. So we have King Tarhuntaradu acknowledged as a fellow great king by the king of Egypt, who is Amenhotep III. So he refers to Tarhuntaradu as my brother, which in royal diplomatic terminology of the late Bronze Age means an equal, a king of equal status. We do know that historically, according to the Hittites, there were only a handful of kings who were considered brothers, quote unquote, so great kings. The Hittite king, the Mitanni king, who was later replaced by the Assyrian king, the Babylonian king, the Egyptian king, and the Mycenaean king. So those were the great powers according to the Hittites. According to the Egyptians, they likely left out the Mycenaean king because that's an area far away from Egypt at the edge of the known world from their perspective. So they did not care very much or did not have much business with the Mycenaeans, did not consider them as anything more than distant trade partners. But they did consider Tarhuntaradu a brother. So very important and represents the pinnacle of the Arzawan power in the late Bronze Age. We're talking about the early to mid 14th century BC. Luis Adame says today it would be the nuclear powers. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it works like that. We have some. Yeah, I wouldn't compare it to the today's situation in any case. But Luis Aldame says Tarhuntasa is not well located. You are correct. So the city of Tarhuntasa is not well located. There are a few proposed locations. You can see one on the screen right now in the middle of the screen, just north of Cyprus. That's one of the proposed locations. But we do know that the region controlled by Tarhuntasa, which is a coastal southern Anatolian region, was a very important region in the Hittite world. Because at some point in time, even the Hittite capital was moved from Hattusa to Tarhuntasa. So, very important historical region in the later time in the later part. In the late Hittite Empire, it was a rather autonomous region within the Hittite Empire. All right, Luis Aldavis, I'm not gonna comment on that. Okay, yeah, okay, but that's an interesting terminology when it comes to the great powers. Okay, but either way, so Tarhuntaradu is the only Arzawan king who achieved the status of a great king, and I believe that he considered himself to be the most powerful, and well, basically, he was the most powerful king in Anatolia, technically, since the Hittites were on their knees at that time. The city of Hattusa was sacked by the Kaskan invaders from the north. Hittites were having those wars of survival. They were all over the place, scattered in smaller regions, very dire situation. All they were almost destroyed at that time, and Tarhuntaradu, as we mentioned, made use of that and became the most powerful king in Anatolia, achieving the status of a great king and facilitating Arzawa to become or to achieve the status of the great kingdom. He was succeeded by either his son or grandson. We are not sure if there was any king in between them, but he is succeeded eventually by Uhhaziti. Uhhaziti, who ascended to the throne at some point in mid-century, mid-14th century BC, and by this time we had revival of the Hittite Empire under King Suppiluliuma I, who managed to consolidate his power. He managed to defeat the Kaskans, retake Hattusa, and he turned and he expanded the borders in all directions. He actually regained lost territory in all directions. Not the whole territory, but he managed to liberate or retake the lower lands from Arzawa. He managed to retake, I believe, Pitasa or parts of Pitasa from Arzawa also. There was an agreement between the two kings, especially, and now we're talking about King Uhhaziti and King Suppiluliuma I. Apparently, there was an understanding or an agreement between the two of what the Hittite Arzawan border would be. However, when Suppiluliuma died in 1323 BC, many of the Hittite adversaries, including Arzawa, saw this as an opportunity, as a weakness that needs to be exploited. His son, Suppiluliuma's son, ruled for, I believe, only 1 or 2 years, and then he was succeeded by his other son, Mursili II. And Mursili II was initially not very well respected by his adversaries. Uhhaziti called him a child. He called him, I believe, referred to him as an incompetent ruler, unworthy of his father, and so on. Either way, Mursili managed to prove himself against Kaskans. He managed to defeat his adversaries domestically, I believe, and he attacked the border cities who were, for whatever reason, anti-Hittite. I do not know what the deal was between Uhhaziti and Suppiluliuma I, but these three cities, Atarima, Huarnasasa, and Suruda, had hostilities with the Hittites, and Mursili II attacked them and captured these three cities. These are the border cities between Hittites and Arzawa. And the leaders of these three cities, they flew to Arzawan court and they were accepted and welcomed by Uhhaziti. This is something that did not sit well with Mursili. So Mursili, he sends a letter to Uhhaziti requesting extradition of these three individuals. Uhhaziti just laughs this off. He disrespects Mursili. He calls him a child. He calls him unworthy of his father. He says that he respected his father Suppiluliuma, but he does not respect him. He says that Uhhaziti says that he has many soldiers, many chariotry, his army is huge, and that the Hittite army under Mursili is small, that he has very few soldiers, very few chariots, he is not afraid of him, and he is going to defeat him, essentially. So the war breaks out between Arzawa and the Hittite Empire. At this time, the army of Arzawa is led by Piyamaradu, who is a son of Uhhaziti, while Uhhaziti sits on a throne in Ephesus. Mursili personally leads his army, and they meet in a border area, I believe. The Hittites are victorious. The Hittites eventually manage to secure a decisive victory, and the road is now opened all the way to the capital. Not completely open, but the Hittite army is now marching to the capital of Ephesus all the way on the western Anatolian coast. Luis Aldame says, "Bring it on, kid." Yeah, that's essentially what Uhhaziti said. He refused to return those refugees, those three kings, rulers who escaped, and he basically said, "Bring it on, kid." Yeah, that's basically what happened. But Mursili, he brought it on. So he defeated Piyamaradu, general and Uhhaziti's son, in battle, and he was marching towards Arzawan capital. And at this time, we have Hittite records of a thunderbolt hitting. Going all the way through the sky. Everybody saw it. According to the Hittites, it hits the capital of Ephesus, and it lands right before King Uhhaziti's knees, I believe, or it hits right where Uhhaziti is standing, according to the Hittites, and Uhhaziti, he falls ill. The Hittites are able to storm the city. They are able to defeat Arzawans once again. They enter Ephesus, and Uhhaziti, together with his sons, they escape. They flee the city. They flee Arzawa, and they are accepted by the Mycenaeans in one of the Mycenaean islands as refugees. I believe at this time we have Piyamaradu. He still returns, goes back, and he rallies the Arzawan, the remaining Arzawan defenders, the remnants, and Mursili spends some time subduing all of these cities, destroying all of these smaller cities, and eventually King Uhhaziti dies in exile. He dies in the Aegean Islands. And after this, we have negotiations between the Mycenaeans and the Hittites, where peace is agreed. And as a part of this peace, we have extradition of Piyamaradu. We have extradition of Uhhaziti's son to the Hittites. He is brought back to Hattus as a prisoner, and we have a peace between Ahiawa and the Hittites. That's how the Hittite-Arzawan War ended, and thus the kingdom of Arzawa as an independent entity ended also. Arzawa was split between several neighboring states, namely Seha, Mira, and Hapala, which became Hittite vassal states. And that was that. That's the end of independent Arzawa. The Mycenaeans, they kept their possessions in Miletus, and their influence was now greatly reduced as well, because Arzawa was the greatest ally of the Mycenaeans and the greatest tool that they used to disrupt expansion of Hittite influence in Western Anatolia. Obviously, that's now gone, and now the Mycenaeans are reduced to supporting some renegade warlords, some rebels, and soon enough, one of those rebels is going to emerge as a very powerful and influential individual in the region. Lino Benetti says, zero Hittite or Arzawa mentioned in Linear B tablets, meaning that trade with these lands was very limited or perhaps non-existent from a Pelian point of view. This is, well, it's true that we do not have any significant, I don't believe that there's mention of Hittites in the Linear B records. I would have to double check that. But when it comes to Arzawa, as we have mentioned at the beginning of the video, Arzawa and Assuwa are kind of mentioned as Asivia. There's a term Asivia or Asivio mentioned several times in the Linear B records, and it refers to persons or individuals from Assuwa or Arzawa. We are not sure. There's no clear distinction between Assuwa and Arzawa in the Linear B records. These mentions they date from the period of Arzawa in the late Bronze Age, not the period of Assuwa League. So it is difficult for us to determine what the differentiation is exactly, especially from the Mycenaean point of view, because it doesn't show in the Linear B records, but there is mention of Asivia, which means likely Assuwa or Arzawa or both, referring to the region of Western Anatolia. All right, so we are 1 hour and 12 minutes in. So with the defeat of Uhhaziti, we have end of Arzawa as an independent state, and we have emergence of rebels, warlords, and other troublemakers from the Hittite point of view, but very useful allies from the Mycenaean point of view. And this brings us to the one and only Piyamaradu. The next segment, Piyamaradu, a Western Anatolian warlord, possibly connected to the deposed Arzawan nobility. We are not sure who he was exactly. He was referred as a renegade or a troublemaker by the Hittites. Newsdrifter asks, shout out to Newsdrifter. He asks, what do you make of this bolt of lightning story, allegory, or embellishment? I think it's likely a mythical story that added to what was otherwise a historical event. So obviously, I believe that everything happened as told, except that that huge lightning bolt was magically seen by the Hittites and traveled all the way to the capital and hit the king at his where he was standing. So that's my allegory. Yeah. Lino Benetti says, thank you. I will check for possible connections. That sounds good. And we are here with Piyamaradu. We mentioned him several times already. So we mentioned him prominently in the episode of our Mycenaean Hittite conflicts in the late Bronze Age, a big episode that we did. And we have a segment on him once again. So Piyamaradu, likely an Arzawan warlord, possibly a member of Arzawan nobility. Whether or not he was related to Uhhaziti and his sons, we are not sure, but he appears to be a very respected figure in Arzawa, in the conquered land of Arzawa, and he appears to be a very fierce enemy of the Hittites. He is not just some random renegade who showed up, a bandit, and started causing trouble. He was very The Hittites were very wary of him. They were not happy to see him. He was apparently very powerful, and his activities spanned across reigns of no less than four Hittite kings, as you can see: Muwatalli II, Mursili III, Hattusili III, and even Tudhaliya IV at the very beginning of his reign. I believe by the beginning of Tudhaliya IV's reign, Piyamaradu is starting to get referenced as a figure of the past. So he finally passed away from the Hittite point of view. All right, so either way, he was supported by the Mycenaeans, same as the kings of Arzawa in the previous times. He married his daughter to the governor of Miletus, Atpa or Atpas. So just judging by these, we can see that he is a person of importance, a person of relevance, not somebody who randomly showed up and grabbed some power. So he's a person of legitimacy. He is legitimate enough to marry his daughter to a Mycenaean governor in Miletus. So one of the most important Mycenaean governors, the chief guy when it comes to the overseas operations of the Mycenaeans in mainland Asia Minor, Atpas, he is married to Piyamaradu's daughter. So Piyamaradu is likely connected to the former Arzavan nobility, whether or not he is related to Uhhaziti and his sons. We are not sure, but he definitely had legitimacy or some legitimacy behind him as well as clout because he proved to be a very powerful and capable warlord as well. So after the dissolution of Arzawa, the Mycenaeans they did not sit still. They took action. So they supported Piyamaradu in Arzawa, who waged a rebellion over there, and he took the city of Ialanda, that is an inland city to the east of Miletus, excuse me, to the east of Ephesus, both Ephesus and Miletus actually. So that's a city that goes east to the east of these, further inland. Piyamaradu managed to take this city. His base, his main base of support was coming from Miletus, obviously, from Atpa, who is now his son-in-law technically. At the same time, there is a Mycenaean Hittite conflict over the city of Vilusa, over Troy. And right here we know that there was some war or deposition of a pro-Hittite kings or elements within the city. Either way, the Hittites were marching with their army to confront either Mycenaean army which took Troy or a Mycenaean supported army which took Troy. Whether or not Piyamaradu had a hand in this, we are not sure, but there was a war involving Mycenaeans and Hittites over Troy, and it was all once again an inconclusive battle where both sides realized that they have a difficult enemy on the other side. In the meantime, Piyamaradu he invaded Seha land, which is to the north of Arzawa, and this is one of the three vassal states that the Hittites installed after the conquest of Arzawa: Seha, Mira, and Hapala. Seha being perhaps the most powerful of the three at the time, was invaded by Piyamaradu and his force, and the ruler of Seha basically not surrendered, but he accepted the will of Piyamaradu, and Piyamaradu essentially made Seha a vassal state to the governor of Miletus, to the Mycenaean governor, Atpas. He also took the possession of Lesbos and I believe some artisans that he took without allowing them to reach the Hittite territory. So there was a problem with the Hittites over there that also had to be resolved as a part of the peace between Mycenae and Hittites following the battle for Vilusa. So eventually, Mycenaeans and Hittites are able to find peace over Vilusa. An individual named Alexander or Alexandru is accepted as the king of Vilusa, and there is a separate Alexandru treaty where he accepts Hittite vassalage. Whether or not he was a Greek individual, He definitely has a Greek name, Alexander, because Alexandru is not a Hittite name, it is not a Luvian name, it is a Hittite rendering of a Greek name, which is Alexander. So whether or not there is a Greek or a or a king coming from with some relations to the Mycenaean Greeks, he officially accepted the vassalage of the Hittites, and or perhaps perhaps Alexander was not exclusively a Greek name at the time. We are not sure of his identity. We are not 100% sure of his identity. We do know that in Greek mythology, Paris, Trojan prince, was actually his real name was Alexander. So there's a correlation over there as well. All right. So the Mycenaeans and the Hittites are able to make peace. Seha returns under Hittite vassalage. Vilusa, at least nominally, accepts Hittite vassalage. Whether or not the Hittites exercised much real power over Vilusa, that's a big question because from the later historical events and what was happening in the region, we can see that the Hittites did not have much power in Velusa, definitely not as much as they had in, let's say, Hapala or Mira. So we are not sure about that. And they also later they would try to get control over Velusa even more indirectly through Mira, I believe. So so their control over Velusa is very questionable. Either way, this leaves Piyamaradu in a in a tougher position. Now he needs to deal with the Hittites himself, and this is when I believe he makes an incursion in Luca, and he seizes a border city, which is a Hittite aligned city in the region of Luca. He destroys the royal compound, the Hittite compound. He burns it to the ground, and the Lucians, they're sounding alarm. They're calling for the Mycenaeans to intervene. They're calling to the Hittites to intervene. They are very scared of Piyamaradu. And this is when Tavagalava, the brother of the Mycenaean king himself, arrives to Asia Minor, and he goes to Lucca. What he negotiated over there is not known, but he is clearly stated to be a person of great importance, obviously being a brother of the Mycenaean king. We do not know the name of the Mycenaean king himself, unfortunately. And we do know that the scholarly consensus pretty much is that Tavagalava, being the Hittite rendering, is a Hittite version of the Greek name Eteocles or Eteocles. So Eteocles or Tavagalava, he, I believe, he calms down those elements in Luca lands which are Mycenaean aligned, and those others are to be subjected to the negotiations between the Hittite king and Piyamaradu himself. So Piyamaradu, he negotiates with the Hittite king. I believe that we're talking about either Hattusili, possibly Hattusili the third at this time. I'm not sure which exact king was this at the moment, but it was very likely Hattusili the third because Hattusili he sent his son and crown prince to negotiate with Piyamaradu directly and bring him to the Hittite king so they can conclude peace treaty. Piyamaradu does not want to do that because he's afraid that it's a trap, that he would be captured by the Hittites. Instead, he refuses to meet the Hittite crown prince, presumably Tudhalia IV, before he succeeded his father on the throne. Instead, Piyamaradu requests that he should be recognized as a king in Arzawa, and he would agree to be vassal to the Hittites nominally as long as he is recognized as a king. This causes the negotiations to break down, and the Hittites are now marching towards Ialanda to fight Piyamaradu. Piyamaradu's brother, I believe, engages Hittites 3 times in battles. Some of those were ambushes. The Hittite sources report very difficult terrain, very hard-fought battles. At some point, Hattusili III had to dismount and fight on foot together with soldiers, so it was a very tough situation for the Hittites. They managed to weather the storm and push the Arzawan rebel army out, and subsequently Piyamaradu and his companions they withdraw to Miletus. The Hittites were able to capture Ialanda and destroy the city, and subsequently destroy all of the Arzawan aligned rebel settlements. When the Hittite king goes to Miletus to present his request for Piyamaradu's extradition, Piyamaradu is allowed to flee Miletus further into Aegean Sea, where he is granted refuge by the Mycenaeans once again, and he is now unapproachable by the Hittites. The Hittite king, all he can do is complain to Atpas about this, and Atpas listens to the Hittites, and he takes an oath that he would inform the Mycenaean king of what transpired. Subsequently, the Hittites they go back to the Hittite territory and they write the so-called Tawagalava letter to the Mycenaean king, where they basically complain about the whole situation. They give out a few options of what they think should transpire. One option is for the Mycenaean king to forbid Piyamaradu from conducting attacks on the Hittites from the Mycenaean territory. Second option is that I believe he goes to the Hittite king to reconcile with him. And the third option is that if he wants to continue being hostile to the Hittites, he should not be hostile from the Mycenaean territory, but from some other neutral territory, such as Mysia or Caria or so on. Either way, we are not sure what ultimately happens. We are not sure what is the response of the Mycenaean king. He definitely does not hand over Piyamaradu, and Piyamaradu apparently continues to be a threat to the Hittites in the following decades. It is only during the reign of Tudhaliya IV where Piyamaradu, who by now would have been a very old man since he was active since basically the beginning of the century, is referred to as a figure of the past. The Hittites are finally allowed to, they're finally able to be happy that Piyamaradu is no longer around. So with Piyamaradu, we definitely have the end of the Arzawan, well, or presumably Arzawan warlords who are able to successfully operate in Western Anatolia. He is the last person that we mentioned in connection to Arzawa. In the following period, we have the late Bronze Age collapse. Before that, we have decline of both Hittites and Mycenaeans in Western Anatolia and in general. We have the loss of Miletus when it comes to the Mycenaeans, and Miletus, which is referred to in the Milavata letter sent by the Hittite king to the king of Mira, his vassal. They talk about fixing a border with Miletus, but they are not talking about any Ahiawan presence anymore. So from this point on, and we are not sure which exact who exactly controls the city at the time. We do know that according to the Homeric sources, which were written hundreds of years later, but they do have some historic, I guess, significance in a sense that the Carians did inhabit that area. So, according to Homer, Miletus was a Carian city during the Trojan War, which is about 1200 BC, correlates to about 1200 BC. So, it would have been Carians who took possession of of Miletus, as the Mycenaean Greeks are kicked out of Anatolia altogether. However, the Hittites themselves, they are not so powerful either. They do not control Velusa anymore. They are talking to the king of Mira that he should be the one that exercise control over Velusa. And they also complain about non-compliance from Mira and many other transgressions. They are very unhappy with the king of Mira. So we can see that the region of Western Anatolia is now free of any significant either Hittite hegemony or Mycenaean influence. And with this, we are slowly entering the period of the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the late Bronze Age collapse. Late Bronze Age collapse happening from the beginning of the 12 from the beginning of the 12th century BC. Yeah, that's correct. We have end of the Mycenaean Greece as a part of the broader late Bronze Age collapse. Whether or not this is resulted by the Sea Peoples, as we mentioned in the previous episode, or perhaps some other Greek tribes from the north, some internal struggle, some other thing that caused the Pylos to be destroyed, Mycenae to be sacked, and this heavy decline of the Mycenaean Greece throughout the century, loss of the Linear B writing system, for example, one of the most important things that happened, and unfortunate from the Mycenaean perspective. We are not sure. We do know that the Hittite Empire was destroyed at about 1180 to 1177 BC at the hands of the Sea Peoples. We talked about this in the previous episode, the Battle of the Nile Delta. We talked about this in the episode about Alasia. So everybody's pretty much familiar with what transpired by now. Essentially, the coalition that the Egyptians known as the Sea Peoples, consisting of Peleset, Teyaker, Weshesh, Shekelesh, Sherden, and other groups, managed to destroy the Hittite Empire, the city of Ugarit, the kingdom of Alasia, and to conduct campaign against Egypt itself. Eventually, they were defeated by the Egyptians. But the rest of these great kingdoms and states of the late Bronze Age were not as lucky, especially the Hittites, who are now ended as a power. We have end of the Hittite Empire and end of the late Bronze Age. What happened to the region or land of Arzawa? We do know that the Egyptians reported that the Sea Peoples also destroyed Arzawa, among other lands. So they reported that no army could stand before the Sea Peoples. They destroyed the Hittites, Ugarit, Alasia, Carchemish, Kodi, and Arzawa. Obviously, Arzawa was not an independent state at that time, so what the Egyptians referred, what they meant by this, we are not sure. Perhaps they destroyed some cities in Arzawa, that's possible. We do know that there was a naval battle between the Ugaritic ships, the Hittites on one side, and the Sea Peoples on another side in the Luca lands. So perhaps there was some widespread destruction over there that also included some cities of the Arzawa land. So either way, the entity or the land of Lydia emerged from the former Arzawa land, and this is where we entered the well, we call it historical times, but all of these are historical times that we're talking about. So entering Greek Dark Ages from 11 to 800 BC, and the subsequent historical times where the Greek alphabet emerges, we do know that from these Arzawa lands, the land of Lydia emerged, and we have many myths and perhaps not myths, perhaps accounts of ancient Greek tradition of the foundation of many of these ancient Greek colonies on the coast of Asia Minor, where we have city of Ephesus reportedly inhabited by Carians or Liligs, who are named as a subgroup of Carians, and also Lydians as inhabitants of the city before they were defeated and pushed out by the Greek settlers. And subsequently, we have the Greek Dark Age as well. This is all happening throughout the Greek Dark Ages, and it's only getting recorded after year 800 BC. So, with that being said, I think that we are through with the topic. The kingdom of Arzawa, very significant polity in Western Anatolia in late Bronze Age. We went through the identity of and the origins of this kingdom, the early mentions from the Old and Middle Hittite kingdom periods, from the reigns of Hattusili I in the mid 17th, and Amun, what is the name? Yeah, in the mid 16th century BC. We have Assuwa League being defeated by King Tudhalia 100 years later in the mid 15th century. By the end of the century, we have emergence of Arzawa as a powerful player in the region under King Kupanta-Kurunta, who oversaw destruction of the Hittite army under General Kisnapili. Well, he was not directly involved, but he was a Hittite adversary at the time. This was facilitated by Madawata and presumably Atarsia of Ahia. Later, throughout the century, we have the weakening of the Hittite Empire and the rise of Arzawa to the most powerful stage that they were throughout their history, the early to mid 14th century BC under King Tarhuntaradu. And after that, we have a slight weakening of Arzawa under Uhhaziti during the reign of Suppiluliuma I. We have the fixation of their border, and after that, under during the reign of Mursili II in Hittites towards the end of the century, we have Hittite conquest of Arzawa following the Hittite-Arzawan War. In the following century, throughout the whole first half of the century, Piyamaradu, presumably Arzawan, warlord, possibly connected to the deposed Arzawan dynasty. He waged his own campaigns against the Hittites, against their allies, until he eventually passed away at some point in the mid 13th century BC. After that, we have the final mentions of Arzawa in the Hittite records as being destroyed along many other lands by the sea peoples as they roamed through the eastern Mediterranean, destroyed the Hittite Empire among others, and attempted to destroy Egypt. Eventually, they were stopped and decisively defeated by Pharaoh Ramses III. With that being said, that's all that we have for this evening. And let's see what the chat says before we call it a day. We're 1 hour and 40 minutes in. I would say a pretty good episode. We went through as many as 8 segments, which is not many episodes that we did in the past had over 8 segments, perhaps only a few of them. All right, we have discussions about the name Alexander. That's fine. That's we have references to the Trojan War in the chat. Lina Benetti says 1200 BC, 10 years plus or minus, perhaps referring to the Trojan War. I agree. Luis Aldamis, the Greeks and allies went on rampage. Troy, Arzawa, Lycia, Cyprus, Ugarit. This is a reference to the Sea Peoples. All right. Yanis says, we'll say it in the comments, guys. We can answer in 3 lines. These things are serious. Okay, I'm not sure what Yanis is referring to. Milan Lukic says, Lewis, it is old theory that the Philistines slash Greeks became the tribe of Dan. Of course, one of the Philistine tribes. Okay. Lydia emerged, but only after the Scythians destroyed Phrygia first. Well, Louis, Lydia actually emerged before Phrygia was destroyed by Cimmerians. Lydia existed. They existed at the same time that the Phrygian kingdom existed, and they were allies, perhaps at some sort of junior partner relationship with the Phrygians, but the city of Sardis and the surrounding area it controlled, which is the Lydian, historical Lydian dynasty, they did exist at the time of the uh, of the Phrygian power in Anatolia. They did exist. They only after the fall of Phrygia, they were essentially left as the only independent significant state in the region. So they took many of the Phrygian clients and Phrygian cities under their control. They eventually defeated the Cimmerians, I believe, and the Scythians, and eventually they submerged Phrygia into Lydia now, but they kept friendly relations with the Phrygians because the Phrygian royal house continued to exist in Gordian even at the period of the Lydian Empire, so to say. So we do have that account where Prince Adrastus of Phrygia killed somebody, I believe his relative in Phrygia, and then he was accepted on the Lydian court. So yes, Lydia definitely existed at the same time as Phrygia did. They did not come after Phrygia. They became powerful after Phrygia disappeared, but they existed at the same time. They were allies. They were more of a like a junior partner or some kind of maybe subservient position to the kings of Phrygia, but the kings definitely did rule in Sardis at the time of the Phrygian dominance. Jim, shout out to Jim in the chat. He asks, "Is Arzawa the Hittite name for the land? Can the Greek or otherwise name be reconstructed from Arzawa?" So yes, that is a Hittite name for the region, for the land. We are not sure what exact Greek name would be. Presumably, the Greeks used Asavia for Arzawa. There are a number of references to Asavia or Asava in the Linear B records, and this name is used for, well, there is no distinction between Arzawa and Assuwa in the Linear B records, so it might have been used for both. We are not 100% sure, but is that where Asia comes from? Yes, Asia comes from Assuwa or Asivia in Linear B. And there's also a Linear A record, a Linear A reference to Assuwa, which is Asia, which is perhaps the closest to Asia, Asia being Asia, and this is how the Minoans of Linear A referred to the land, Asia. Mycenaeans in turn referred to it as Asivia, or perhaps possibly Asia as well, because Asivia is actually ethnonym, meaning a man from Asia, or it's a feminine form. Asivio is a man from Asia, and Asivia is a woman from Asia. So whether or not it is very possible that the Linear B or the Greek would be Asia as well, not Asivia. It's possible that it would have been Asia or Asiva or maybe Asivia, either one of those. But yes, these are the references to Asia in a sense of Assuwa and or Arzawa. Not clear distinction there in the Linear B sources. In the Hittite sources, we do have some distinction because sometimes we have mentions of uh, Assuwa separately from Arzawa. So there is distinction in the Hittite sources. Milan Lukic says, according to Herodotus, Lydia existed earlier as Myonia. There are many theories about Lydia. One of that Lydia is actually Luvia. It is possible that there is some correlation with the name. So we obviously in Greek mythology there's another explanation I believe coming from Lidus, mythological figure, or Lidos. But we do know that Luvia, there's an early reference in the old Hittite text to Luvia as a broad region in western Anatolia. So perhaps there is some linguistic connection there when it comes to the name. It is possible. It is possible. Luis Aldames. Europe may have been originally a name for the Balkanic Peninsula. Libya, later Africa, comes from the Libu. You are correct, Luis Aldames. Yes, so we do know that very early in ancient Greece, their concept of the known world was different from today, obviously, and it evolved. They did not know, they had a rather limited knowledge of the known world, and they considered Europe was what essentially was Greece and broader Balkans region. They considered that to be Europe. They considered Asia to be chiefly Asia Minor, but later they applied that name to the rest of the Asian continent. And Libya was originally the name referring to what they considered to be continent of Africa. Later that was substituted, and Lydia became known as Africa. Yeah, that's correct. Lino Benetti, Wanax, could you do a segment about the Griffith warrior? I know you went to the Getty conference. Perhaps, well, actually, it was History with Sai who visited the conference, and he sent me the pictures. But I did visit Getty Villa last year. I was there in February last year. But I could do a segment of the Griffith. Or you mean Griffin of Griffin Warrior, as if Griffin Warrior tomb? Yes, we could do that actually. Just yeah, there's There's quite a material of that, and if you remember, we did a video on Enkeliavon from Pylos, a very very obscurely known individual from the Linear B tablets. So we could do the Griffin Warrior as well. Why not? All right. Well, I think that that's going to be it for now, for today. We will be back tomorrow. I'm not sure about the exact time for tomorrow. We might be back tomorrow at noon or maybe 1 p.m. Eastern time, which would be 6 to 7 p.m. Greek time. Noon here would be 6 p.m. Central European time, so 7 p.m. Greek time. So we'll definitely be back tomorrow with another episode. Whether or not we're going to go with Bronze Age Halkis, which was voted last week, or something else, we're still going to determine that. I still need to do a little more research before I go with Halkis because we're talking about the region of Georgia in the Bronze Age. It's not. I would like to do it right. I wouldn't. We need to get some research correctly done there before we go with it. We'll see what the topic is going to be. Maybe surprise for tomorrow. Let's wait and see what happens. All right. So thank you everybody for being here once again. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. See you soon.